Hello, this is Andy from the Engineers Academy, and in this video series we're going to be looking at worked solutions to the Unit 1 Engineering Principles exam, which will be sat by students studying BTEC Level 3 Nationals in Engineering. Now, the document that we're going to be referring to today are the sample assessment materials that are or have previously been provided on the Edexcel website, and the document that we're going to be referring to in particular is Issue 1 of the sample assessment materials. Question 8 reads, Conduction and convection are used to transfer heat away from engineering components to prevent damage. Describe the process of heat transfer through conduction and convection. So just before we go about actually answering this question, let's look at the three different modes of heat transfer that can occur. So on this slide, I've got three basic sketches for the three different modes of heat transfer. In the top left corner, we've got conduction. In the bottom left corner, we've got convection. And on the right, we've got radiation. Now, the first important thing is to discuss which mediums each mode of heat transfer is applicable to. So first of all, we have conduction, and conduction occurs in solids. Next, we have convection, and convection applies to fluids, and by fluids we mean liquids and gases. And radiation doesn't require a medium, so heat can be transferred through radiation in a vacuum, and in actual fact any hot body will radiate heat. Now, for the purpose of this question, we're primarily concerned with conduction and convection, so let's first of all look at conduction. Now, on the diagram there we have a heat source being applied to the left hand side, and basically what happens is as we apply heat to the left hand side, the particles in the material on the left hand side are going to begin to vibrate. So we have a particle and they're going to vibrate. To be more accurate, they're going to vibrate with more intensity because all particles will have a certain amount of vibration. So the particles begin to vibrate with a greater intensity, and as they do so, they bump into neighbouring particles and cause those neighbouring particles also to vibrate with greater intensity. So what we have as we move along the sample of material is particles which vibrate, and as they vibrate they bump into other particles, and that's how the heat transfers through the piece of material. So the kinetic energy of the vibrating particles moves through the piece of material, and as a result the heat transfers through the piece of material. Now, convection works in a slightly different way. You should be aware that hot air rises, so as air is heated it rises, but the same is true for any fluid. And the reason behind that is because it becomes less dense. So what we have in the bottom left hand corner is we have a container of fluid, a sealed container of fluid, and we're heating the fluid in the bottom left hand corner. As a result, it becomes less dense and it rises. But as those particles rise, it leaves a kind of void behind. And as a result, the fluid is going to move from the bottom right hand corner to fill that void. And this process continues, and what we get is a circulating of the fluid. Now, the third mode of heat transfer is radiation, and as mentioned before, any hot body will radiate heat in the form of electromagnetic waves, and this doesn't need either a solid or fluid medium to occur. So let's refer back to the question. Now, in my opinion, it's usually a good idea to use diagrams to support descriptions. So for conduction, what I would do is I would start with a simple sketch, very similar to what we had on the previous slide. And on here, I would write solid. And I would also add my heat source. Now, in terms of my description, I would say something like, heat transfer due to conduction occurs in solids. I would then go on to say, as the particles on the left-hand side are heated, they gain more energy and vibrate at a greater intensity, or words to that effect. And I would finish by saying, in doing so, they collide with other particles, transferring energy along the sample of material. Now, this is a relatively basic description, but that's all that the question's really looking for due to the number of marks that have been allocated for the question. Now, let's move on to convection. And again, I would begin with a diagram. I would apply my heat source. And I would sketch on some lines here to show the circulating of the fluid. And I would begin by saying convection occurs in fluids. I would then go on to say that as fluids are heated, they expand and rise. I would then finish by saying this leaves an area of low pressure, which we're talking about here. This leaves an area of low pressure where colder fluid moves to fill the void. And as I've got my diagram, I would probably finish by saying something like this causes the fluid to circulate as shown in the diagram. So as mentioned there, this question has only been allocated 4 marks. So what you're looking for is 2 distinct points for conduction and 2 distinct points for convection.